This is the Motherlands podcast. The intention of this podcast is to provide evidence-based information through honest conversations on fertility, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and beyond by bridging together the two worlds of allopathic medicine and holistic practices to improve the reproductive health outcomes of women. I am your host, Keely Semler. Today we have a wonderful conversation with Kimberly Denitz-Zuleger, a fellow doula and educator based in the Ojai, Ventura, Santa Barbara area. Some of you may know her as Mama Three Birds online, where she often shares her personal experience being a doula and a mother. Her job as a doula stems from her being a caregiver since she was a young child. Somewhere between nature and nurture, we contemplate how our identities are formed. For Kim, she explains that being a doula is just who she is. In order to maintain a cohesive birth team, we discussed together the importance of a doula being in collaboration with the family as well as the provider. Kim also shares how exactly informed consent should work within a hospital setting so that birthing people feel safe. Thank you for being here, and I really hope you enjoy this one. And if you do, please rate, review, and share. Thank you, and I'll see you guys again soon. I'm curious, in what ways did your childhood prepare you for becoming a doula and helping women, if at all?
Okay, well, thanks for that question, first off. So my story is, I think, a little bit more unique in the sense that a lot of people come to doula work or supporting women often from their own birth experiences. Mm-hmm. Meaning they either had a good birth experience or they had a bad birth experience. And because of those reasons, they're called, to support people in birth. For me, I often will say that I think I sort of came here, meaning here, like Earth, to be a caretaker of women and babies. And that started very, very early on for me. So I'm the oldest of 5. And I was 18 months old when my first sibling was born at home. I was present. Obviously, I have no recollection of that. Or I was present for his birth. And then I was present for every subsequent birth that my mom had. She kind of brought me into the fold. And it's really interesting. This could go really deep. My mom was highly dependent upon me from a very, very early age, both emotionally and physically. That's a very long-standing theme in my life. 17 years of therapy to back that up. So when my mom got pregnant with my third sibling, it was triplets. And I was 8 years old, 8.5. I used to hold the bag for her so she could throw up behind cars. I have a core memory of being at a garage sale and her saying, get the trash bag, get the trash bag. So I didn't know any different because I only knew breastfeeding mothers, babies, and then loss because my mom lost the triplets in utero. So my brother survived. He was in one sac and the twins died. And so she had to deliver. And I remember sitting on my floor in Ojai.
Is that where you grew up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was where I grew up. Moved from the South Bay when I was 6.5 years old from Hermosa, Manhattan Beach area to Ojai. And I remember sitting on the floor and her saying, Kimberly, the twins have died. We have to go and we have to have the babies. And at the time there was a freestanding birth center in Ojai. This was in 1989. I remember being so angry that the twins had died because I was so excited for, I was so excited to have more siblings. So that was sort of, my first experience. She delivered my brother, who was one of the triplets, and a year later she got pregnant. And at that time she said, I'd like you to help me have this baby. And I was like, okay. I have no memory of actually saying, okay. I just remember her giving me Spiritual Midwifery by Ina Gaskin, and she gave me her original book from the 70s.
Oh, wow.
And said, read it. And so I read it. And I was a big reader, so it resonated with me to to read something. So I read the book and my dad woke me up. I remember he woke me up in the middle of the night and said, it's time to go. And we drove to the birth center in Ojai. That was in 1990. And I was so nervous. I remember going into the bathroom and relieving myself because I was so many nerves,
yeah.
It was a big deal. And then I held her leg, helped her push. And when the baby came out, the doctor said, it's a girl. I had 3 brothers. And so we were waiting for a girl. And so my mom yelled my name because she was so excited that it was a girl because I had wanted a girl so bad.
Oh.
Yeah, and then I turned 10 a couple months later.
Was that a lot for you?
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine what that was like and the pressure.
Right. Yeah. So it's really interesting. I think I'm, really starting to get into sort of like the excavation phase of understanding how that has all played into my work, because it's this thing where it's like my purpose, was it my purpose, or was this just sort of, kind of given to me?
Nature versus nurture. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And 9 years after my sister was born and I supported her birth, I became a mom. I got pregnant at 19. So I sort of just kind of kept going, because that was what felt normal for me. And then my mom's emotional needs became higher and physical needs became higher, and I ended up helping take care of my siblings. My mom moved out of the country for a while, so I had a 6-month-old at one point and siblings at home that I was taking care of at 20 years old.
Wow.
So, for me, it's like my doula work has always sort of been compulsory. Mm-hmm. It's kind of an extension of my experience here on earth. I don't really know any different than taking care of babies and taking care of women. And so there's always been a lot to work through as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, it's, I guess, a lifelong journey of figuring out what that means.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, because, I struggled with identity for a long time because my identity was sort of given to me. It wasn't until I was 28 and I got into therapy after going through a really tumultuous time period of life as a single mom that I was able to start uncovering, like, what is identity? My identity was given to me. And what does that look like?
I can relate to that too. I feel like my childhood also, I had a greater responsibility that I didn't ask for, taking care of a sibling, also single mom. So yeah, and I know that time informed how I doula, how I show up for my clients, for better or worse.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really interesting, identity, and like we came here to be who we want to be, but also things are given to us and we roll our sleeves up and we're like, all right, I can do that.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, everything that we are and that we become is a reflection of our childhood, and even further back than that, right? It goes all the way back to what we experienced in the womb and what our mothers experienced in the womb. I mean, it's all a continuation. None of this, you can't compartmentalize like our experience. Mm-hmm. So it's all a continuation of everything that's come before us and ultimately everything that will be after us as well. Yeah, so it is really fascinating. But, when I have people say to me like, oh, you're so lucky you're a doula, or that must have been your dream. And I'm always like, it wasn't my dream. I wouldn't say like, oh, my dream was to do this. It's who I am. It's not what I do. I mean, my dream was to be an actress. That was what I worked for. That's what I wanted. I didn't get to do it because I was busy taking care of kids, becoming a mom and taking care of other kids. But that was my dream. This is, who I am. It's just part of what I do, if that makes sense.
Yeah. In your words, how would you describe the work that you do as a doula? What makes you unique in your offering, supporting families that only you know how to do?
Okay, well, good question, Keely.
That's a heavy one.
I think I have the ability to see people, humans, really, really comprehensively. I have a deep compassion for the human experience as a whole. It doesn't matter who it is. The way that I've sort of always described it is that I can meet people wherever they're at in their spiritual experience of life. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to my doula work and comes to meeting families, I always have felt that I have the ability to meet people exactly where they're at. That's why I've been somebody that's been able to take somebody that is planning an epidural because of trauma. Mm-hmm. And I will never say that a home birth is always going to be the right choice for someone. Do I think home birth is the right choice for someone or for people in general, as far as, the effects physiologically, physically, emotionally, psychologically? Yeah, sure. If they're there. Mm-hmm. If they're not there, then it's not safe. That's why I'm kicked out of all the crunchy groups and all the free birth groups online, because, I have said that there is a time and a place for some of these interventions. And that's because I think of being able to look at people so comprehensively. I cannot categorize birth and I can't compartmentalize birth because you can't do that to us. I mean, we're so multifaceted as humans and we're so multifaceted as women. Mm-hmm. And when you're looking at our deep histories and our experiences with sex, with life, with our mothers, with our periods, it's so complex and it's so nuanced. Mm-hmm. And so when I meet a family, and I'm looking at them and I'm hearing what they have to say, I really try to lean into what it is that they need. And I've said this to people before, I really sometimes feel like I'm meeting people in the middle of their spiritual journey, wherever they're at. And I'm okay with that. I like being in the nitty-gritty with people. I don't just want, the perfect home birth with the people that have done the work and everything's great. They're really wonderful. You have that, incredible birth high when there's like such extreme safety and so much oxytocin flowing through the room. But I'm also down for the nitty gritty, and I think that's because I have been through so much in my life and I needed people. I needed somebody to be there for me, or I needed somebody to show up for me, and I didn't have that. I became that for myself. And so I think that plays a role in my doula work too. When I have somebody come to me and say, I'm planning an epidural, or I need to have a C-section, and I'm like, what am I going to do? Say no, sorry? For me, that works.
Yeah, I really like what you said about meeting people wherever they are at. And I relate to that so much, because I think one of my favorite things to do with clients is when I get to know them or when I meet them and they tell me what they hope to feel in their experience. Almost everyone's like, yeah, I want an unmedicated birth, And I'm like, why? Tell me why that matters to you. Because in theory, it's beautiful, and I think that it's a great goal to have. But a lot of people are saying that without necessarily wanting to do the work that entails with doing it unmedicated, and or it's just not going to work for them.
And especially in the hospital, when they say, I want an unmedicated birth, and I'm birthing in the hospital. And I'm like, okay.
And so what who the doctor is,
right,
and it makes it real hard to do it.
Like, what does that look like exactly? Tell me more.
Yeah. And it's hard because when you've been doing this as long as you have, and you can see patterns with certain doctors or providers, handling their patients in a certain way, and that your client is hoping to accomplish some sort of experience that is really counter to what you've witnessed with that provider. It's hard being like the bearer of bad news, or helping them shift or go, do you really like that provider? Are you open to switching? Have you helped clients switch providers before?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't work for the hospital. I don't work for a midwife. I don't work for the doctor. I don't work for the entity. I work for myself, and I work for the family. There has to be reciprocity. So I have to trust the family, and, they also have to trust me. I'm not going to go into a situation, especially with a provider that I know that is either abusive or there's misconduct or anything like that. I'm not going to put myself in a position like that, nor am I going to put a birthing body in a position like that. I will absolutely tell people there's a particular doctor in Santa Barbara that I don't work with because there's been litigation and I was involved in that. And I will straight up say, I'm involved in a situation with that doctor, so I can't help you, but I'm happy to refer you to somebody that could. And I just recently had an experience with a midwife that is not collaborative. And the clients had hired her based on a recommendation. And then they came to me, and we're a great fit. We work really good together, and she's not collaborative, doesn't want to communicate with me. And it's a little bit of a unique situation with the family. And so I thought about it, I did like some prayer around it for myself, and then I decided to let them know. And I never would put people in a position of having to make a choice. Ultimately, it does come down to that. But I would never obviously phrase it as like, you've got to decide it's me or them. And we have two different roles anyways. I'm not the medical provider, but I didn't feel safe working with this person. And if I don't feel safe, then I can't serve the family to the best of my ability. And not that I 100% always feel safe in the hospital, but there has to at least have a pretty significant amount of confidence in what I'm going into. And so I called him and I just said, I don't feel comfortable working with her. I don't think that it's a good fit for me. I need to be able to collaborate in order to keep you guys safe and happy. And they said, oh gosh, that's so interesting, because we were just going to call you and tell you that we're not vibing with her.
Oh, wow.
I think I picked up on it too, and so then we went through the process of finding who's a good fit. But as far as our community is concerned, I do a lot of matchmaking. And that's probably one of the top questions that I get asked is, where should I go? Who should I hire? What should I do? Because we don't have a lot of providers around here. Between Santa Barbara to Ventura, there's not a ton, especially depending on what it is that people are looking for. But that's probably in the top 3 questions that I get asked, whether it's DMs, text messages. I absolutely help people, kind of guide them to what is going to work for them. And I try to look at it really, both comprehensively and not like dogmatically, just because you can't. And it's not just about who I think is good or who I think is best, obviously. It's more based on like what their needs are, what they're looking for. But I'm also going to, give them examples of doctors I've worked with that I know that will ask for informed consent or are pretty hands-off, who are kind.
What are your thoughts around informed consent in a hospital setting?
It's trash.
It's something that everyone should be doing, but nobody does.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, man, it's so rough.
Like totally falls on our shoulders with like making sure that the patient or our client has enough information to be able to decide in real time.
Yeah, and I think there's an art to it, and I don't think that it's ever perfected.
Well, I'm curious, can you actually say for listeners, in your own words, what you feel informed consent is?
Right. For me, it would be that a patient/client understands what's happening to their body before it's done. So that would look like something such as, hi, Keely, the doctor would like to see some more progress and we'd like to give you some Pitocin. How do you feel about that? Do you want to discuss it with your team? That would look like informed consent. The flip of that would be, hey, Keely, we're going to start Pitocin because you're just not progressing where we're at. Mm-hmm. Another example would be, I'm going to check you now, versus, hey, Keely, how would you feel about us doing a vaginal exam? The doctor would like to see what kind of progress you've made. Mm-hmm. We rarely see that happen. And I would say in the hospital setting, sometimes I feel like I'm a parrot because I don't know if you feel that way, but the nurse will walk in and, will say, I'm going to check you now, or it's time to do a check. And then I'll look at the patient/client and I'll say, hey, Keely, they would like to do an exam. How are you feeling about that? It's just like,
I do the same thing.
Da, 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 da. It's just like pinging back and forth, or, hey, it looks like they're going to up the pit now. Cause they'll just walk in and they'll just up the pit. They won't say, hey, we're going to go from 1 to 2 now.
And let's talk about that for a second, because is that informed consent?
No.
If they're just going in a patient's room and upping the
Nope.
medication without letting the client or the patient know.
Nope. It's a fault of the system as a whole. But I would also say the consumer has to demand what is right for them.
Right.
And I tell everyone to reframe it. You are hiring Ventura County Medical Center or wherever it is that you're delivering. You are hiring them.
That's right.
They work for you. You are paying the bills for that nurse.
Yeah.
You are the consumer. So fucking act like it.
Yeah.
We cannot lay there and just let things happen to us.
Totally.
And
I tell clients all the time, like, you're not just a patient, you are a paying customer.
Right.
So you deserve
Right.
to be treated with respect and integrity. Yeah.
Right. You are paying for this. And that's such like a dismal way to look at giving birth, because you and I both know that
it doesn't have to be that way.
It is a spiritual experience, and it can be in the hospital as well. But unfortunately, that has to also come from the consumer. It's why I also tell like all of my clients/patients to keep their own clothes on so that they look like an autonomous person coming in to give birth, not Joe Schmo who died in the hospital gown
or someone
on the
getting
unit.
surgery.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm like, this is your room. Mm-hmm. This is where you are going to bring your baby into the world. Wear your own clothes. Put on your music. Make it yours. Mm-hmm. And all of these things can be done kindly and with love. It doesn't have to be condescending. It doesn't have to be passive aggressive by any means. And I always talk to them about that too. Like, we want team players, and we want to be team players too. We want informed consent. It's so interesting because if you create that kind of environment that begs for collaboration, which I always really try to work hard when I get in there to do, it's interesting how informed consent will kind of start to trickle in.
Yeah, I agree.
Suddenly it's like, oh, hey, Keely, are you okay if we do an exam? When we humanize the person coming in. When they start to see us, when we make emotional connections, which is what I often do with nurses when I come in.
Yeah, and when the nurses feel like the doula is a collaborator with them, and it's not like us versus them, then they kind of warm up. Something you said earlier about helping guide your clients to find the right provider fit and birth environment. Something I've been reflecting on a lot is how our culture is so results driven. Mm-hmm. Did you have the unmedicated home birth experience that you wanted? Did you have the hospital birth experience that you wanted? Like, as if we can distill it down to that. And something I like to do with clients is ask them, if At the end of your experience, when you're holding your baby and you're at home and you're reflecting on your birth, how did that experience make you feel? Did you feel held? Did you feel like the people around you made you feel good and safe? Because to me, I think that matters just as much as the result of did you accomplish exactly what you set out to do, you know?
Yeah. I mean, in many ways, it matters more because even if you end up in a C-section, how you're treated prior to that matters almost even more than the unwanted C-section. Right? Because an unwanted C-section doesn't have to be traumatic if you were held and supported and provided informed consent and treated like a human being. You may still be upset that happened, but it doesn't mean that it is, this extremely traumatizing experience.
That's right.
Same thing with an epidural. And I always tell my clients, like, I loathe this thing in society that we've done, which is, did you have an epidural? Did you not? Mm-hmm. We just compartmentalize birth as basically like three things: epidural, not epidural, C-section, and then emergency C-section from C-section. Mm-hmm. And we're like caught in this really bizarre, I like how you said it, like results driven, like ideology.
Or also, how about this? You're a better mom if you have X birth, if you only feed your baby organic baby puree or whatever bullshit.
Right. Well, yeah.
Or if you breastfeed, you're a better mom than if you bottle feed or formula feed.
Right. Well, and the uprising on social media that's really, played into that. And I think, the problem is like, A, that takes away from the human experience. It also is a really privileged perspective because we're not looking at varying cultures, varying demographics, institutionalized racism and how that affects people birthing, not only obviously birthing, but feeding their babies. And if you're not, I see all these like, all the Instagram super big, really popular accounts. And some of these guys have been doulas for, very short amount of time and only been to a couple of births. But it's basically if you aren't birthing at home and you are not breastfeeding exclusively, and if you are not grinding up the fucking spinach from your own farm, like death be to you and every person and
you're giving your power away.
And you're giving your power away. And I just like my brain is like can't. I don't comment on those things, and I try not to get into it on the internet. But
and also that's beautiful. That is beautiful.
Oh yeah, no one's not saying that that's not beautiful.
To project that onto all these other women and to women that aren't mothers yet but want to be mothers someday, and they see that as like unattainable.
Right. And we're teaching people the wrong thing, and we're teaching them to want the wrong thing. We're often missing the whole point, which is like to go back to what you were talking about, which is like the experience itself, not just the result.
Right. How did you feel held?
Right. Because, life is imperfect. We're all going to experience grief. We're all going to experience outcomes in our lives that we don't want because we're human. We're here for a short amount of time and shit happens. But the goal is to be seen and supported even when things suck. Mm-hmm. I had a VBAC last summer, and she so desperately wanted a VBAC. I so desperately wanted it for her. And labor started out so beautifully. And she had had some hypertension. As we were in labor, it kind of slowly morphed into preeclampsia and then eventually went into HELLP syndrome. And we had to have a C-section. But laboring at home was so beautiful and so sacred. I can still see her in the shower.
And healing.
And then we went to the hospital and, we stood there and it was beautiful. It was daytime. It was a Sunday. She's laboring and she's making the sounds, and the doctor comes in and, he's talking to us, and he was a little gruff, but, I was kind of in between them, just bubbling, if you will, just kind of acting as like a little bubble and just saying to him, really kindly, so we're moving into HELLP. And he was like, yeah, I think so. And I said, okay.
Can you explain to listeners what this
just like is? Preeclampsia, so hypertension. They do some lab work. We can see that things are all really elevated, and then it can move into a more serious case of preeclampsia, which typically means that we do need to be delivered. And it is real. Mm-hmm. It is valid. Mm. And, I went over to the bed and I sat there and I looked at her and I said, are you okay with us going to do a C-section now? And the reason that I do that is because I want people to own their births with their own words. I don't want them to be told it's time to have a C-section and them say, okay, in this way that feels like diminutive. You want people to be able to sort of wrap themselves around the experience. And I sat there and I said, he's suggesting that we get a C-section now. That means we can't do our VBAC. And she was contracting and I said, are you okay with that? And how do you feel about that? And do you understand? And she said, yeah, I want to have a C-section because I want the baby to be okay. And I said, okay, and you too, because,
Right.
baby's fine. I was like, this is more, baby's doing great. And she said, okay, we went and did it. And afterwards, it's been a year, but we've talked multiple times. She's even commented on posts and whatnot that I've made. And she always says like, it wasn't the outcome that I wanted, but it was exactly what I needed with the outcome that I didn't want. Because
Wow,
she
I'm
was
getting
so,
goosebumps.
there was informed consent and she was held. And it fucking sucked. And I cried, and I don't cry at every birth. And I don't cry during the moment at every birth. But that was what she had, And so the moral of the story is all of that matters. It's not just whether you had an epidural or you didn't have an epidural or you had a C-section or you didn't have a C-section. It goes back to what you were saying, which is, everything in between matters too. And I think we just don't focus on the in between.
Yeah. I would love for you to talk about your work with VBACs and the organization ICAN. But before we talk about that, is there anything about birth or postpartum that you feel like people need to pay more attention to, other than what we just talked about, the in-between? But is there an aspect of birth or pregnancy or postpartum that doesn't get enough airtime?
I think one thing is people don't like that saying, like, you birth how you live. I've heard people not really like that, but the truth is like your words have to match your actions. If you have a history of trauma and you want to have an unmedicated birth or your pregnancy is bringing stuff up, you've got to match what you want to do. That means therapy, and that means coaching. That means consistent yoga practice.
Or pelvic floor
And
work.
pelvic floor work. That means having that hard conversation, with people that you need to have hard conversations with, because everything comes up in pregnancy and birth, amplified. Mm-hmm. I think I see a lot of that. Like, I want this, but burying everything else. Everything that we are and everything that we do is connected. Mm-hmm. Our bodies keep score. So do our minds, so do our hearts. Everything keeps score. So it's all going to come up. Does that mean that like you're going to have the perfect birth if you go to therapy? Of course not. Like, I don't mean that. What I mean is really trying to match what we're saying and what we're doing, I think is really important. And you can see that with people that are doing that. You can see how those, not even just the results, but just their life,
Right.
how their life is impacted by doing those things. So that I think is really important. And along those lines, I think people that do, when it comes to postpartum and postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, I think people that have any history, which is honestly the majority of us, but if you have a significant history of trauma, having a support team already in place and ideally a therapist and or psych in place. I require it. So if people have a history of anxiety, depression, sexual trauma, et cetera, I require that they're either in therapy or that we already have lined up a plan because the predisposition is higher that we're going to be experiencing that. And I think that's also a flaw in our system.
Totally.
We just kind of wing it. We're just like, good fucking luck. Like, hope this Zoloft works. And like, it sometimes doesn't. People really struggle and they really suffer. And I want people to be able to thrive in postpartum. And so I think having a really good support team, especially because we don't really live multi-generationally where we have even support at all, especially in white culture.
Totally.
And honestly, some of the like most severe cases I see are people that are higher demographics, 40s, having babies, very little support. Lots of affluence.
Yeah.
Those are a couple things I think for sure.
I'm curious just on a personal level, and you can share as much or as little as you want, but have you tried to run from any hardships or lessons that inevitably keep finding you?
Yes, of course. Many, many, many. I would say a lot more through my 20s and 30s. Yeah. I have, a really difficult relationship with my parents. I wouldn't even call it a difficult relationship. It's just not really like super existent. My relationship with my dad has always been fairly non-existent. And with my mom, just like I shared earlier, high dependency. So because of those things, you become somebody like me that is sort of highly ambitious to a fault, high fixing nature. There's a level of sort of when is the other shoe going to drop? The lessons around my parents have always been really like prominent, of course. I mean, that's like how it is for most of us. But, my parents used to fight and I used to have to protect my siblings, And so when you kind of grow up in an environment like that, like physically, I would lay across my siblings so that they wouldn't have to hear the fighting. And so when you kind of have those sort of physical experiences and emotional and psychological, there's a lot kind of to work through, especially when it comes to like your own relationships. So surrounding like vulnerability, commitment, that kind of a thing, if that makes sense. I've been with the same therapist for 18 years.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she raised me up.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's actually quite unique. I always joke. I always tell her, I'm like, you're my mom, you're my dad, you're my motherfucking grandma. She's my person because I don't have person besides her. My grandparents aren't alive anymore. My parents aren't, emotionally available. So I'd say I'm a little bit like, I got a little like wall. That's my lesson. I don't really trust people very easily, and I'm highly, highly capable. Mm-hmm. So I'm highly capable. So if I'm going to depend on anybody, it's going to be myself. So a lot of work surrounding that and being able to trust.
Well, I'd imagine that your clients really benefit from you then.
Yeah.
It's funny,
Yeah.
like our wounds become like a really amazing entry point when we heal and integrate them. Like they don't need to be this nasty, shadowy thing. Like they can actually be a source of connection.
Yeah, I love that. That's how it feels for me now. It didn't obviously always feel that way for me. I went through some very, very, very dark times when I was a single mom. The Travis and Sadie, I mean, they're the lights of my life. Just life was challenging. But yeah, I very much feel that way now. And I love helping to create families because it's so meaningful to watch people love each other, coming from, I never saw my parents hug or kiss ever. Getting to see that, getting to be part of watching other people's families, it feels really special. There was a lot of grief around it for a long time, but I don't really live in like that space at all. I live much more in the space of like, this is what I'm here for. I get to help make families sort of despite, my experience with it.
Yeah, I love that. Let's switch gears. I think it would be really helpful if you could share with listeners about your work with ICAN, what it is, what the mission entails, because you're doing a lot of really exciting things.
Yeah, I love ICAN. ICAN is the International Cesarean Awareness Network. And just like its name, it's an international support group that educates, empowers, and provides information to people who are planning VBACs and cesareans.
Vaginal birth after cesarean.
Vaginal birth after cesarean, or trial of labor after cesarean, also known as TOLAC. ICAN has been around since the 1980s. And it was originated at a kitchen table with two women talking. What hasn't?
I love
started there. And she had had a cesarean. She wanted a VBAC. She got her VBAC despite being told she couldn't. And then she started sharing the information with other women, and thus ICAN has grown. The support groups are all over the world, both virtual and in person. I am the co-leader for the Santa Barbara chapter, and I've been the co-leader there for about 7.5 years. The Santa Barbara chapter is doing incredibly well, and I'm so lucky to work with the other co-leaders that I work with. It wasn't started by me. It was started by a woman named Virginia Bobrow, who's worked with Birthing from Within for many years. And then shortly thereafter, it was taken over by another woman, and then myself and Anastasia Stone. And Anastasia and I have continued to run it. We put on the maternal health panel yearly. It started as a VBAC panel with, I think, like 30 people in the room, and has grown to a couple hundred plus people every year. And we
I want to go to that.
Yeah, please do. We showcase panelists, and we moderate, and we ask questions, and it's for the community. It's education for the community and also for providers. This year's will be in September, and it will be back at the Cabrillo Pavilion right on the beach in Santa Barbara. It's a great location, so we'll be putting out that save the date soon.
Is there an ICAN chapter in Los Angeles?
There is not.
Wow.
Yeah, there's not. So I just started the Ventura chapter because I live back here in Ojai after moving from CARP. We just had our first meeting, and it was fantastic. So
that's so cool.
And then I am on the board. I am the chapter director internationally. So I implement, oversee, and support all the chapters all over the world. And this is an all volunteer nonprofit organization, and we work really, really hard, and it changes lives.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Does ICAN have a website?
They sure do. It's ICAN-something.org, but I'll send it to you.
Okay, we'll put it in the show notes.
I'm on the website committee. We're actually revamping the website. We're modernizing the website. We're actually right in the process of doing that. When I'm leaving here, I have a Zoom with our designer, actually.
Oh, I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time and for being so open and willing to share about who you are, what brought you into this work, and how you support people. I mean, I think the work that you're doing is so meaningful and so needed. So I just really appreciate your time.
Yeah, Keely, thank you so much for having me. I
and
appreciate
how
it.
can people find you or connect with you if you want to be found?
Oh, yeah, you can find me. Let's see. So my website is mama3birds.com. My Instagram is the same, which is @mama3birds. And I'm always open to DMs and questions, and I'm happy to help our community in any way that I can.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Keely.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share with friends and family and stay tuned for the next episode.